For those I haven't met yet, I'm Liz Slade, and I'm now 2 years into the role of Chief Officer of the General Assembly of Unitarian and Free Christian Churches, a role which at this critical time in our movement is focused on strategic transformation. I didn't expect much in this job to be normal, but this last year has certainly not been that. It's been a year like no other for all of us. The first thing I wanted to say was a huge thank you. The annual report shows how much has been happening in this last extraordinary year, but of course there's a huge amount that doesn't get a mention in a formal report like that has been keeping many people really busy, much of it in new and demanding ways. So I hope that we can celebrate the work of all of you, the ministers, the lay leaders, the Zoom hosts, the committee members, the treasurers, those who've worked out how to cope with losing rental income and the collection plate, those of you who've been on the phone to those without the internet, those of you who've sent cards and letters, those who've tended people who are struggling in the many ways that we've all struggled this last year, those who've worked out how to make the building safe and have read all the government guidance as it's changed throughout the year. Everyone has done so much and found courage and care in the most challenging circumstances. Thank you. A few weeks ago, some of you came to the launch of the new book of poems from Reverend Cliff Reed, published by the Lindsay Press. I want to start by sharing one of those poems. How do we grow? We need more rock and roll in our churches. Brixton Unitarian Young People's League, the Young Unitarian, 1958. How do we grow as a community of the liberal faith? There have been so many schemes, so many calls to set in train some hopeful big idea. All have fallen short, at least in their well-meant stated aim. So what to do? We must keep on keeping on, nurturing the local, because that is where we grow, when we do grow, doing what works in our own localities, sensitive to their nature and their needs, being ready to welcome the visitors, the seekers, the pilgrims, the refugees, because they will come if our doors and our hearts are open wide. And don't forget the rock and roll. I totally agree with Cliff's message here, that we must do what works in our own localities and be ready to welcome the visitors, the seekers. And of course, the call, we need more rock and roll in our churches, came from young Unitarians in 1958, just a year after Elvis Presley's first UK #1. What are those young Unitarians' grandchildren calling for now? Or great-grandchildren? We need to know if we're to be able to open our doors to them. And of course, the rock and roll message of embracing joy and aliveness is important for people of all ages, not just the preserve of the young. Cliff talks about the schemes and big ideas that have fallen short, and I've heard this from many of you. I can feel the eye rolling and sighs at the thought of another enthusiastic person coming along with ideas of change. This year's annual report shows our membership dropping below 3,000 people for the first time. For context, 10 years ago, it was 4,500. I don't believe there's a new single initiative or genius plan that will help us to grow. Nor do I think that numerical growth should be our target just for its own sake. Instead of thinking in terms of schemes and big ideas, we need to nurture the fabric of our community. With declining numbers, fewer people are left doing more work, and it's easy to become depleted, even more so after a year of pandemic. We know it's hard to envisage a bright future when we're depleted and tired. Our movement is a complex living system, and while we can encourage certain things to grow, if they're planted in the wrong conditions or not tended along the way, they just won't take root and flourish. Of course, some of the things we do need detailed processes and careful project plans, but growth and development are organic processes, and our role is more like that of gardeners, being responsive to the seasons and the soil conditions and what unexpected things shoot up. But what might this future garden look like? The staff team spent some time imagining the dream 2030 scenario recently. Not worrying for now how we might get there, but painting a picture of what we think is needed, what we'd love to see emerge. We imagined a vision where there are welcoming spiritual communities in every neighbourhood, many of which are Unitarian and Free Christian, and where it's very normal for people not just to belong to a local congregation rooted in their neighbourhood, but also to online communities, and that they put money aside to support them financially and to invest in their own spiritual development. They take joy in giving their time to contribute to them creatively. We saw the richness of people being engaged in local meaning making, not just passively consuming the mass culture of Netflix and shopping centres. We saw the skills of ministry being truly valued, not just in these communities, but for leaders from all walks of life, with ministry training being adopted for leaders in business, in politics, in education. Spiritual and religious matters are respected and relevant in mainstream culture, with many Unitarians taking part as leading spokespeople. All congregations have a clear and compelling vision for their next 10 years and resources to make their plans happen. Everyone has a place where they can feel belonging, where there is a building that feels sacred and feels like home, and where they can reliably find wisdom, joy, trust, and a safe space to be themselves. The world is kinder, better at holding complexity and honouring difference. It's more loving. So how might we get to a future like this? The pandemic has made people more hungry than ever for meaning and community. It can be so easy after so many decades of British culture becoming more secular or religious participation dropping in many faith groups. And now with the challenges of pandemic on top, to feel doom and gloom. I don't see it that way. I know we've got something worth sharing, and I think it helps to accept just how challenging the circumstances are for many of us. For many of our congregations, those who have lovingly stewarded the chapel for many years don't have people to whom they can pass on the baton. They might continue for many years like that, keeping on going, meeting the needs of current members, without having significant next generations to pick up the baton. It's a status that reminds me of Lonesome George, the last of his species of Galapagos tortoise, who died about 10 years ago, aged 102. For many years, the world knew that Lonesome George, despite a happy Galapagos life, would have no offspring, no legacy, no next generation. I know there are congregations that will continue to survive and thrive, but it's clear that we need to act in order for our collective legacy to live on. It's something that feels very important to me personally. I feel so grateful for the impact that Unitarianism has had on my life, and I want to make sure I'm not closing the door behind me. So what do we do? My colleague Bob Janice Dillon had some great suggestions in his recent article in The Inquirer. His suggestions for what we might do as we come out of pandemic were: be kind, connect with your community, know your mission, open your doors. Our collective spiritual health needs attention after a year where, rightly, our physical health has been prioritised. Our doors now need to be open. So how will the General Assembly help with this? In our pre-pandemic strategic planning, we recognised that one of the most important things for our movement was to help build our collective capacity, filling people's tanks in order to build the energy that will help us to find the path forward. The GA's role is always to be in service to those who are in service to others, and the way we serve needs to reflect our current context. This is part of our work of transformation. Part of this capacity building was to gather 40 leaders together just before the pandemic reached us, to spend 3 days together at Woodbrook in Birmingham to explore the art of hosting spiritually healthy communities. We learned and practiced skills for holding the conversations that matter, and explored what it means for our Unitarian communities to be spiritually healthy into the future. We identified what we wish to nurture and what we need to let go of. We left with a sense of excitement and possibility. We felt it again when the Welsh Department invested in similar support for emerging leaders from chapels across Wales earlier this year, who connected over their wishes for the future of Unitarianism. When everything changed last March, we found new ways to do things. Hundreds of you gathered in April for Being Together, our first experiment in Zoom workshops, worship, social time. It felt important to be connected to one another, and I'm grateful for the way everyone threw themselves into creating a really meaningful event. We built on this with ministry in a time of pandemic, diving more deeply into the key issues like how to use ritual in online gatherings and how leaders can ensure they are well resourced for their communities. To look at the General Assembly's financial picture, as you will have seen in the annual report and in the video presentation from David Joseph, our finance manager, we are fortunate that the GA's finances haven't suffered too much in pandemic. We're particularly grateful to the Essex Hall Trust for providing an interest-free loan, which meant that we avoided the significant losses had we released cash from investments as we had planned to when the markets crashed this time last year. We'll be paying it back shortly. We're also hugely grateful for some unexpected legacies that have been gifted to the GA, including one for an estimated £400,000. It's incredibly moving and inspiring to receive these gifts from people whose lives have been touched by the Unitarian and Free Christian movement over the years. And we look forward to sharing more news about these legacies and what they might enable us to do. We've been looking more closely at the long-term financial sustainability of the GA. We want to make sure that we're using our resources in a way that best serves our mission and that we're able to do what's needed in the short term while being good stewards for the long term. Of course, income from congregational quota payments has been decreasing for many years as our membership has dropped. And while we're lucky to have investments and generous grants, we want to be operating in a way that's more sustainable for the long term. There are no quick answers to this, as of course it relates to how we work across the whole movement. I expect some of you are waiting to hear what I'm going to say about the new national website. And for others, you've already heard way more comments than you wish to. I know that for some people, there was a wish for wider consultation in the process. And so I'm sorry we caused a bit of a shock for some of you when you saw the new site a few months ago. Of course, our future depends on inviting new people into our movement. And the primary audience of the website is those not yet Unitarians. Our old website was aimed much more at insiders, and so we knew we needed to make a shift in order to get the message out. We worked for nearly a year with a design agency whose work was informed by a steering group from across the movement, who shared their perspectives on who we are, where we've come from, and where we might be going, giving feedback on the designs as they evolved. Some key themes emerged from this work. Firstly, that we need to honour the diversity in the movement. It's clear that a one-size-fits-all approach won't reflect how different our congregations are. Secondly, we need to stay true to our roots. This is one reason for the focus on radical, which comes from the word for root, as well as the pride and inspiration we heard so many people have in our radical forebears. We also recognise that the way we communicate about ourselves needs to reflect the level of religious literacy in Britain today. Yes, we have plenty of people among our number who can engage masterfully on the deep theological issues, but for many newcomers, this won't be what they're looking for on the first engagement. We also thought about the types of people we might wish to welcome in. Although, of course, everyone is welcome, it's hard to create a website that's aimed at everyone. We know that in order for congregations to thrive, we need not just bums on seats, but to reach those who, in time, will be willing and able to roll up their sleeves and be part of the hard work of building the congregations of the future, to be safe pairs of hands for the baton to be passed on to. We recently shared an update of some of the changes that have been made in response to feedback, and we're grateful for those of you who got in touch with us directly or responded to our requests for input. An important piece that's in the works is creating a new section that's explicitly aimed at those people who are leaving other Christian denominations, as we know that they'll arrive with a very different set of questions to those who don't have much experience of belonging to a faith group. There's also some other work underway to increase accessibility. As Cliff's poem says, we need to nurture the local, and we've been working on tools and templates that will help congregations to communicate their unique ethos more easily, and we'll be in touch with more information about that soon. Beyond the specifics of the website, it's clear that some things touched a nerve with some people. I was especially grateful to the person who told me plainly, there's a fear that the General Assembly has a hidden agenda to make Unitarianism purely secular and humanist. I'm happy to confirm there's no such agenda, hidden or otherwise. The GA is a religious movement, although it is one where we might all struggle to agree on exactly what we mean by religious, or indeed movement. I liked the explanation that one person gave me the other day. We're religious because we practice with other people. Someone else put it, we're religious because we're people who follow a way, and we won't tell you what way is right for you. There are some big questions that have been brought to the surface, particularly around how we find unity in our diversity, and how we get our message of a free and inquiring religion across to people when so much in today's culture in the UK is secular and individualistic. I believe that grasping these nettles will help us to find our way forward, and we're looking at how we can host some spaces for a collective exploration of these questions. As we slowly emerge from pandemic, we know that the world ahead will be very different. We know that there are people with a hunger for community, an appetite for finding more meaning and purpose in their lives, and that we have much to offer them. I'll finish with one more passage from a Lindsay Press book, A Free Religious Faith, published in 1945. It is hard for us to understand why religion, which means so much to us, has come to count for so little in the lives of others. It is for us to ask what we can do to help people to recover a sense of divine meaning and strength in their lives. Undoubtedly, the rush and hurry of modern life are very unfavourable to the deepening of people's spiritual life. But these conditions are symptoms of the trouble rather than its cause. The root goes deeper. With the decline of religion has gone a loss of vision, and this loss has prevented people from facing with courage the problems which human progress of the past has brought upon them. That was published in 1945, but couldn't be more relevant for today. People are hungry for meaning, and after this pandemic, we all need to find strength in our lives. The problems caused by human progress of the past, of course, points to the need to navigate the climate crisis. A free and inquiring religion is so needed right now, and it must be attuned to people's lives and today's culture. Let's work to strengthen this vision, nationally and locally, to help people recover a sense of divine meaning and strengthen their lives, in whatever shape the future needs that to be.